Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed, in labor for 19 long hours, crying out in pain, but there's no one there to hold your hand except for your mother's. And then, in your darkest moment, you whisper his name. And instantly, you hate yourself for that weakness. You feel abandoned, lost, but somehow the love in your heart for your child is stronger than anything you've ever felt before. How do you cope when you're facing the toughest challenge of your life, alone? Hey there, beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Harry's Stories. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like and share this video. Your support helps us continue to bring you these powerful, heart-stirring stories. We need you to keep the channel going strong. Today's story is one you won't want to miss. It's about a mother's resilience, a storm that changes everything, and a connection between two strangers that turns into something unforgettable. I promise you'll want to stick around for the whole ride. Let's dive right in. Gray Henry, a powerful American billionaire, stood by the window of his lavish farmhouse, his eyes tracing the jagged flashes of lightning cutting through the pitch-black London sky. The autumn storm had picked up, intensifying by the hour, turning the night into a cacophony of howling winds and torrential rain. He was isolated here, 5 kilometers away from the city, far removed from the corporate boardrooms where he was usually in control. Tonight, all he had was his solitude and frustration. His pizza delivery had been delayed by over an hour, a minor inconvenience, but in Gray's world, those kinds of delays were unacceptable. The storm was no excuse, and yet his stomach growled, reminding him that even the most successful man could be at the mercy of something as simple as hunger. When the doorbell finally rang, Gray walked stiffly to the door, irritation written all over his face. As he swung it open, he expected to see the delivery driver ready to offer excuses. Instead, standing before him, drenched to the bone and shivering, was a young woman, Chloe. Her dark skin glistened with rain, her braided hair clinging to her shoulders, but it was the look of determination on her face that caught Gray off guard. Despite the miserable weather, she stood there with grace, holding a pizza box, as though it was her only possession left. Gray's frustration faltered as he took in her condition, the visible tremble in her hands and the chattering of her teeth. In that moment, the billionaire CEO wasn't thinking about his delayed pizza anymore. He was thinking about something far more unexpected. This woman, standing in front of him, had just changed everything. Gray invited Chloe in, offering her shelter from the storm. They exchanged pleasantries as they shared a meal, the connection between them starting to grow. Chloe's vulnerability matched Gray's own isolation. For the first time, they weren't just two strangers meeting by chance. They were two people simply trying to survive a night of unpredictability. Chloe was studying at King's College, working to pay tuition and sending money back home to Jamaica to her mother. Despite their contrasting lives, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared struggle. The night wore on, and as the storm continued to rage outside, the two of them found themselves talking, laughing, and sharing stories like old friends. Chloe had opened up about her life, her struggles, her dreams, and her commitment to providing a better future for herself and her family. She spoke of her mother in Jamaica, the sacrifices she had made to get her daughter to London for university, and how she juggled late-night shifts to make ends meet. Gray listened intently, something inside him shifting as he realized how much he had taken his own success for granted. For all his wealth and power, he had never experienced the same raw determination and resilience Chloe carried with her every day. In contrast, Gray began to reveal more about his life, his rise from humble beginnings, the loneliness that often accompanied his success, and the emptiness he sometimes felt despite everything he had achieved. He was a man of power, but tonight He was simply a man with a hunger for human connection. He found himself oddly comforted by Chloe's presence, even though they came from different worlds. As the evening wore on, a quiet understanding grew between them, an acknowledgement of how life, in its unpredictable way, had brought them together in this storm. When the storm finally subsided and Chloe prepared to leave, Gray stood at the door, hesitant. There was a part of him that didn't want the night to end. But as she stepped into the rain again, he felt an unexpected pull in his chest. He had to admit it. Something about this woman, about this night, had unsettled him. It was as though their brief time together had shaken him in ways he hadn't expected. The next morning, Gray awoke to find an emptiness in the house, a void he hadn't noticed before. The storm had passed, but the questions it had raised in his mind lingered. Who was Chloe, really? And why couldn't he shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason? He didn't know, but what he did know was this. For the first time in a long time, he felt something stir within him, a connection that was far more profound than the business deals he'd become accustomed to. And as he prepared to leave for his meetings in New York, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the last time he would see Chloe, or if fate had more in store for them. The days that followed were a blur for Gray. His mind constantly returned to Chloe, the brief yet meaningful connection they had shared, and the strange pull he felt towards her. He tried to bury it under the weight of his responsibilities, meetings, emails, phone calls, all the usual business matters, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the way she had smiled, the way her eyes had softened when they talked. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something important, something that had to be explored. Meanwhile, Chloe had returned to her routine. She focused on her studies, balancing her late-night shifts with the demanding workload at King's College. She kept her distance from Gray, not wanting to get caught up in any illusions or distractions. She had learned long ago that life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It was about survival. But still, despite herself, she found herself thinking about that night, thinking about him. What was it about him that felt so different from the other men she had encountered in her life? Was it his vulnerability, his unexpected kindness? Or perhaps it was the way he saw her, not just as a delivery girl, but as someone with dreams and struggles of her own. One evening, as Chloe was walking back from class, she received a call from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Chloe," Gray's voice was deep and calming. "I've been thinking about you. About that night. I can't stop thinking about it." Chloe's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, and yet here he was, calling her. It had only been a few days, but it felt like a lifetime. "What do you want, Gray?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to see you again. I want to make up for what happened, or rather, what didn't happen. Please, Chloe, just give me a chance. Let me explain." There was sincerity in his words, but Chloe was cautious. She wasn't sure if this was just another passing interest, another momentary lapse in his busy, perfect life. But a small part of her, the part she kept buried deep inside, wanted to believe him. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she replied, her voice tinged with hesitation. "My life here is complicated. It's not just about me anymore." "I understand," Gray responded, his tone softening. "But I'm not asking for anything right now, Chloe. I just want to see where this goes, if there's even a chance. If you'll let me." Chloe felt a rush of emotions, anger, frustration, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. But one thing was clear. She didn't know if she was ready to open herself up to him again, not after everything that had happened. but something in Gray's voice, something in the vulnerability that slipped through the cracks of his usually impenetrable facade, made her consider the possibility. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But no promises." Gray's voice brightened with relief. "That's all I ask. I'll wait, Chloe, whenever you're ready." As the call ended, Chloe stood still for a moment, staring out at the city. She had told herself she was done with him. She had moved on, found her own path. But deep down, something told her that Gray Henry wasn't just another billionaire businessman. He was a man who had seen her in a way no one else had. And that thought, that spark of connection, made her wonder, what if there was more to their story than just one night in the storm? The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Chloe couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, about the possibility of seeing Gray again. But there were too many obstacles, her own fears, her complicated life in London, and the nagging voice in her head that warned her to protect her heart. But what if, just what if, there was a chance for something real? Meanwhile, Gray continued his search for meaning. He had spent years building his empire, yet it always felt like something was missing. The night with Chloe, the brief connection, had stirred something in him that no business deal, no acquisition, no amount of success had ever done. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he was willing to find out. All he needed was a chance Chloe wasn't sure she was ready to give. Days passed, and Chloe couldn't push Gray out of her mind. She tried to stay focused on her classes, her work, and her responsibilities, but every time she found a quiet moment, her thoughts returned to him. To that night, to the way he had looked at her, like she was more than just a pizza delivery girl. It was something she hadn't experienced before, and it terrified her. She had been through so much already, moving to London, working long hours to support herself, and now raising her son Elijah alone. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to open up to someone again, especially someone like Gray, a man from an entirely different world. He had everything, yet he still seemed lonely. Was he really someone she could trust? And more importantly, could he accept the reality of her life? The life she had built without him, without anyone else? Meanwhile, Gray was determined to make things right. He didn't care about his wealth, his empire, or the meetings that awaited him back in the States. All of that felt empty now. What mattered was Chloe, and the son he hadn't known existed until recently. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that he was ready for the future. He had already tried reaching out to her, but Chloe wasn't ready to meet him again. She was scared, she was angry, and he understood that. So, Gray decided to take a different approach. He wasn't going to chase her. He was going to give her space and let her come to him when and if she was ready. But deep down, he knew that if he wanted to be part of her life, part of Elijah's life, he couldn't just wait in the background. He had to show Chloe that he wasn't just another rich guy who would disappear when things got difficult. He had to prove that he was here to stay, to be a part of their world, no matter how different it was from his own. Days turned into weeks, and Gray found himself in Jamaica, not for business, but for something far more important. He spent time getting to know the people in the community, volunteering at local centers and helping out wherever he could. It was his way of showing Chloe that he was serious about being a part of their lives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chloe agreed to meet him, not in some expensive restaurant or a luxury hotel, but at a small, family-run cafe by the beach. It was a quiet place, far removed from the world Gray knew, but for him, it was perfect. It was a place where he could show Chloe and Elijah that he was not just a businessman, but a man who was willing to humble himself for them. When Chloe arrived with Elijah in tow, Gray's heart skipped a beat. Elijah was everything he had imagined and more, his son with his soft grey-blue eyes, looking at him with curiosity. He smiled down at the baby, unsure of how to start. He had so many things to say, so many apologies to make, but the most important thing was showing them that he was there for them. "I've been thinking about this moment for a long time," Gray said, his voice soft but steady. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to be part of Elijah's future. I want to be part of yours, Chloe." Chloe met his gaze, her expression guarded but not unkind. "You've made a lot of promises in a short amount of time, Gray. I don't know if I can believe them. I've spent too long taking care of myself and my son. I've built a life without you." Gray nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since he had arrived in Jamaica, Chloe softened. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, but as she looked at Gray and then at Elijah in his arms, she saw something different, something worth considering. "I can't make any promises, Gray," she said quietly, "but I'm willing to try. For Elijah." Gray's heart soared with hope, though he knew there was still much to prove. This was just the beginning, but it was enough. He had been given a chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As they sat there, watching the sun set over the ocean, Gray couldn't help but feel a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about business deals or corporate victories. This was about family. And no matter how complicated the road ahead might be, for the first time in a long time, Gray felt like he was finally on the right path. And as he looked at Chloe, holding her son with love and determination, he realized that some things in life couldn't be bought or built. They had to be earned. And he was ready to do the work. The following days in Jamaica were filled with a mixture of cautious optimism and uncertainty. Chloe had agreed to give Gray a chance, but she was still hesitant. She had been through so much already, and she wasn't ready to let herself get swept up by a man who had come into her life and left without a second thought. The scars from her past still lingered, and they weren't something she could easily forget. But Gray was proving to be different. He had stayed true to his word. Instead of pulling strings to make his life easier or relying on his wealth and power, Gray immersed himself in the daily life of the community. He helped with renovations at the local school, volunteered at the community center, and worked at Vivian's cafe, anything to prove that he wasn't just looking to make amends for his past mistakes, but to truly integrate into their world. Chloe watched him closely. There was no arrogance in his actions, no expectations. Gray was humble, and for the first time she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them. Still, she kept her distance, afraid of opening her heart to someone again, especially a man with a past so different from hers. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Chloe and Gray slowly began to evolve. They spent more time together, not just talking, but sharing small, everyday moments. Sometimes they would sit by the beach with Elijah, watching the sunset, while other times they would take quiet walks through the town, talking about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. But there were still moments of doubt for Chloe. She had a life to protect now, a child who depended on her. Could she trust Gray? Was he truly ready to be a father to Elijah? Could he fit into the life she had created for herself, a life where she had to be strong and independent, where she had learned to stand alone? Gray, on the other hand, knew he had a long road ahead. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. He had already made strides in proving his sincerity, but he knew he had to continue earning Chloe's trust, and Elijah's. The bond they shared wasn't something he could force. It had to come naturally through time and consistency. One evening, as they sat together, Gray took a deep breath. He had been holding back his feelings, trying to be patient, but he knew it was time to speak up. "Chloe, I know I can't just expect you to forgive me, and I can't erase the past," he began, his voice gentle but earnest. "But I want to be a part of your life. I want to be a part of Elijah's life. I want to build something real with you, if you'll let me." Chloe looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Elijah was playing at their feet, his laughter filling the air with innocence and joy. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know what the future holds, Gray," she said, looking down at her son. "I've made a life here, and I've fought hard for it. But I'm willing to take the chance. For Elijah. For us." Gray felt a surge of relief and hope. They weren't there yet, but this was a step forward. It was all he needed. The opportunity to prove himself, not just as a man trying to make up for a mistake, but as someone who wanted to build a future with them. Over the next few weeks, Gray and Chloe grew closer. They took small steps together, Gray continuing to help out at Vivian's cafe, Chloe teaching her financial literacy class, and, slowly, Gray becoming more involved in Elijah's life. He took Elijah to the park, played with him, and started to form a bond with his son that was stronger than anything he had ever imagined. Still, Chloe remained cautious. She appreciated Gray's efforts, but she wasn't ready to hand over her heart entirely. She had learned to be independent, to take care of herself and Elijah. She couldn't let herself depend on someone who had walked away once before. But Gray wasn't giving up. He knew that love wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about consistency, humility, and being there for someone no matter the circumstances. And that's what he did every single day. He showed up, not as a billionaire businessman, but as a man who cared, who wanted to make things right. One day, as they were walking back from the market, Gray turned to Chloe, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been thinking about this moment for a while, and now that it was here, he felt the weight of his emotions. "Chloe," he said, taking her hand gently in his, "I know this isn't easy, and I know it's going to take time, but I want you to know that I'm here, for you, and for Elijah. I don't expect anything from you, but I want you to know that you're not alone." Chloe stopped walking, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, and all that mattered was the connection between them. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that he had been hiding behind his wealth and status. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and it made her wonder if there was more to their story than she had been willing to admit. "I believe you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I need time, Gray. I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to see where this goes." Gray's heart swelled with hope. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. As they continued walking hand in hand, Gray realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not success, not power, but love. And with Chloe and Elijah by his side, he was ready to fight for it, every step of the way. As the weeks passed, things began to shift in ways both Gray and Chloe hadn't anticipated. The bond between them deepened, albeit slowly, and with each passing day, Gray became more involved in their lives. He wasn't just helping out at the cafe or spending time with Elijah. He was becoming a fixture in the community. He spent time with Chloe's family, getting to know her mother, Vivian, and proving to her that he wasn't here to disrupt their lives, but to contribute to them. Gray's willingness to be humble, to step outside of his comfort zone and his world of power, didn't go unnoticed. Chloe's mother, Vivian, though initially skeptical, started to warm up to him. She saw that Gray wasn't the same man who had walked away that night. He had changed, at least that's what she told herself. There were moments of doubt still, but every time she watched him interact with Elijah or help Chloe with the everyday tasks that came with raising a child, those doubts began to fade. However, there were still days when Chloe questioned herself. She had built a life without Gray, a life that was hers, that didn't rely on anyone else. And yet, with every small gesture from him, every smile from Elijah when Gray held him, something inside her shifted. She had promised herself she wouldn't need anyone, but with Gray, the possibility of needing him, of wanting him, started to feel less like weakness and more like a choice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chloe and Gray found themselves sitting outside, watching Elijah play in the yard. The air was warm with the smell of the ocean breeze, and for the first time in a while, Chloe felt at peace. She looked over at Gray, who was laughing with Elijah as the baby chased after a ball. It was moments like this that made her wonder about the future. Gray, sensing the change, turned to Chloe. He had been patient, giving her the space she needed, but now he felt the time had come to ask the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Chloe, where do we go from here?" Gray's voice was soft but filled with meaning. He wasn't asking for promises, but he needed to know if they were both ready to take this next step. "I know we've both been hurt. I know there's still a lot to figure out, but I'm here for you. And for Elijah." Chloe hesitated, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She had been thinking about this too, wondering where this journey with Gray was leading. The connection was undeniable. But there was still fear in her heart, fear of disappointment, of heartbreak, and of losing herself in someone else. "I don't know if I'm ready to say everything will be perfect," Chloe replied, her voice quiet but steady. "But I'm willing to see where this goes, for Elijah, for us." Gray's heart soared with relief. "That's all I can ask for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll take it one day at a time. No pressure, just us, together, figuring it out." And for the first time in months, Chloe smiled. It wasn't a smile filled with uncertainty, but one that was filled with hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something beautiful. As the weeks turned into months, Gray and Chloe found a rhythm. They weren't rushing into anything, but they were building something real, something that felt like a partnership. Gray had proven time and time again that he was in this for the long haul, and Chloe, slowly but surely, started to let down her guard. They continued to spend their days together, working, playing with Elijah, and growing as a family. They took trips to the beach, had dinners with Chloe's mother, and worked on projects at the community center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And it was everything Chloe had ever wanted. But it wasn't just their lives that were changing. Elijah too was growing. He was becoming more attached to Gray, calling him Dada when they played together, reaching for him when he wanted to be held. It was moments like these that made Gray realize just how much he had missed, how much he had lost, and now had the chance to gain. One evening, after a long day of work at the cafe, Gray sat down with Chloe, a tired smile on his face. "I never thought I'd be here," he said, his voice quiet. "But I can't imagine being anywhere else." Chloe looked at him, her heart full. Neither can I. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles ahead, challenges they would face as a family. But for the first time in a long time, Chloe felt like she wasn't alone. She had a partner, someone who was willing to stand beside her no matter what. And that was something she could build a future on. As the months passed, Chloe and Gray settled into a comfortable routine. They had found their rhythm, one that was based on mutual respect, patience, and the quiet understanding that they were building something that would take time. Chloe's doubts slowly started to fade, replaced by the realization that Gray wasn't the same man who had walked out on her a year ago. He had proven time and time again that he was willing to put in the effort, not just for her, but for Elijah as well. Gray, for his part, was more than happy to prove his commitment. He didn't just talk about wanting to be a part of their lives, he showed up every single day. Whether it was helping out at the community center, spending time with Elijah, or working side by side with Chloe in the cafe, he was there, not as a billionaire CEO, but as someone who was ready to be part of their world. As Elijah grew older, Gray's connection with him deepened. He became a father in the most organic way possible by simply being present. The late-night feedings, the first steps, the first words, he was there for all of it. He wasn't just the man who had shown up in Jamaica to make amends. He was becoming Elijah's father, step by step, moment by moment. One day, as Gray and Chloe sat together watching Elijah play in the garden, Gray looked at her, his heart full. "You know, I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family. A real family. I always thought success was about building an empire, accumulating wealth. But what I've learned is that none of that means anything without the people you care about." Chloe smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I used to think the same thing," she said. "But when I became a mother, I realized that all the things I thought I needed didn't matter as much as I thought. What matters is love, and being there for the people you care about. And now I have both." Gray reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad I'm here. With you. With Elijah." As the days went by, Chloe and Gray began to talk more seriously about the future. They knew it wasn't going to be easy. Life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. But they were both determined to face whatever came next, together. They talked about the possibility of moving to a bigger home, one where they could all grow as a family. They even discussed starting a new business venture together, one that would support the local community and help people in ways that really mattered to them. But despite the changes and the excitement for what the future held, there was still one thing they hadn't addressed, the unspoken question that had hung over their relationship since the beginning: marriage. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Gray turned to Chloe, his face serious. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady, "I know we haven't talked about this before, but I want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul. I want to be with you, and I want to be a part of Elijah's life forever." Chloe looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was heading. But she knew in that moment that she had something to offer him, something that was more than just hope. "Gray," she said softly, "you've already proven to me that you're here for us. You don't need to say anything more." Gray shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I need to say this, because I want us to move forward, to really start our future. I'm asking you, Chloe, will you marry me?" Chloe felt her heart skip a beat. The question had taken her completely by surprise, yet, in the deepest part of her heart, she knew this was something she had wanted for a long time. She had never been one for grand gestures, but this moment felt right. I don't know what to say, she whispered, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I've been afraid to let anyone in, especially after everything that happened before. But you've shown me that love is worth fighting for, and I can't imagine a life without you in it. Gray's face softened, and he reached out to touch her cheek gently. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Chloe. We've been through so much, and we've come out stronger on the other side. Let's take the next step together. The moment hung between them, quiet but full of unspoken promises. Finally, Chloe smiled, the warmth in her heart reflecting in her eyes. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I'll marry you. Gray's face lit up with relief and joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, knowing that they had crossed a threshold, one that would change everything. They weren't just building a future together. They were creating a life full of love, strength, and the unwavering belief that they could face anything as long as they were together. As they began planning their wedding, Chloe and Gray both realized that this journey wasn't just about a formal commitment. It was about the life they had already built together. It wasn't about a lavish ceremony or grand celebrations. It was about the small moments, the quiet conversations, the shared laughter, and the love they had for each other and for Elijah. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but they both knew that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. And for the first time in their lives, both Gray and Chloe felt a deep, unshakable peace. They had found what truly mattered in life, not success, not money, but love, family, and the bonds they had created along the way. As the months turned into a year, Chloe and Gray found themselves living the life they had always dreamed of, together. Their wedding was intimate, held on the beach where they had shared their first quiet moments as a family. The ceremony wasn't grand, but it was perfect for them, surrounded by close friends, Chloe's mother Vivian, and of course, Elijah, who was now running around, a happy, healthy child who had brought them closer than either of them could have ever imagined. The vows they exchanged weren't just promises, they were reflections of the struggles, growth, and sacrifices that had shaped their journey. For Gray, it was a promise to always be there, not just for Chloe, but for their son, and to never take his family for granted again. For Chloe, it was a vow to open her heart completely, to trust in the love they had built, and to move forward side by side with the man who had proven his commitment. In the days that followed, Gray's life continued to change in ways that he never expected. He began splitting his time between Jamaica and New York, investing in local businesses and contributing to the community that had accepted him. His work at Henry Global became more balanced as he realized that his family was the most important part of his life, and he wanted to be present for every moment with Chloe and Elijah. Chloe too found fulfillment in this new chapter of their lives. She continued to teach at the local school, and with Gray's help, they started a small business that helped young entrepreneurs in the community. It wasn't the life she had imagined in London, but it was a life she was proud of, a life built on love, hard work, and the unshakable bond they had formed as a family. As they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the ocean, Chloe leaned her head on Gray's shoulder, feeling content in a way she never had before. Elijah was playing at their feet, and for the first time in a long time, Chloe realized that everything she had ever needed was right here. Closing and conclusion. Their story wasn't one of fairy tales or instant fixes. It was a story of love, trust, and the power of second chances. From the stormy night that brought them together to the quiet moments they now shared, Chloe and Gray had built a life that was their own, one that wasn't defined by their past mistakes, but by their commitment to each other and to the future they were creating together. Through all the challenges, they had found that love wasn't about perfection. It was about the willingness to grow, to forgive, and to choose each other every single day. In their case, it wasn't the storm that defined their love. It was what came after, the calm, the growth, and the promise that they would always face life's storms together. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Gray whispered, "I'm glad I found you, Chloe, and I'm so grateful for this family we've built." Chloe smiled, her heart full, as she looked at their son playing in the sand. "Me too," she said softly. "Me too." And so their journey continued, not as two separate individuals, but as a family united in love, resilience, and the shared understanding that no matter what the future held, they had each other forever.